Hey Gunfighters, a quick preamble to today's episode. I've been working hard on coming up with some realistic modern rifleman training / course of fire / qualification. I'm going to try and plan it so that comes out soon. So make sure you're liked and subscribed. If you like this episode, you'll likely enjoy that. And for the patrons, I just put out what I consider is a good philosophical episode, and I might do it on the general podcast, but they'll get the patrons get different content, let's just put it that way, on what is a modern rifleman's rifle. What is a practical modern rifle? And that was a lot more complex than I initially thought. Anyway, just some announcements there. So make sure you're liked and subscribed if you want the future of DIY training and course of fire for becoming a good modern rifleman, having that skill, that heritage that we pride ourselves here in America as being a nation of riflemen. Get back to that heritage. Anyway, subscribe for that, and if you want to become a patron, you get access to the backlog of content as well. There's a lot of cool insider content on there, not just what is and what is not a practical modern rifleman's rifle, but also gems like guns for the zombie apocalypse or guns for Bigfoot. Stuff like that I do just for the patrons. Hey Gunfighters, just a quick insert. There's some new merch at the store, goodshepherdtraining.com. The sports hoodie that's in the thumbnail, if you're looking on Spotify, that's available. If you're on Apple, I apologize for that really old thumbnail that I took in my old office. I've tried to reach out to Apple, tried to get them to change it, but alas, it's still there. Spotify lets you change different images for each episode. But if you're listening on Apple, which is another big one, there is a pretty cool OD green shaded hoodie that says on the back Roots, and it has crossed rifles, an M16 and an M14. And on the front, it has an old front stuffer, an old musket, and it says, "A rifleman like my fathers before me." Anyway, if that intrigues you, there's a link in the show notes if you care to look at that more deeply. Have we lost our way as American riflemen? I think America has a rich heritage of being good, practical riflemen. I think we pride ourselves on that more than any other nation that I can think of. But have we in recent times gotten away from the practical rifleman concept? Have we gone down the wrong path? That's what we're going to discuss today. Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, gear, philosophy, the right way, with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. You've likely heard the normal bio before. I'm going to change it up a little bit to establish some more bona fides with the rifle. Grew up a poor boy in the South. Grew up hunting and shooting from a very early age. Who knows how many rounds I put through a .22 before I joined the Marine Corps. Even before I joined the Marine Corps, I was into competitive shooting, especially rifle. I had won I don't know how many trophies. I was a gold medalist even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17 in precision rifle. I'm talking old school NRA 3 position. Back then it was 4 position, but very much precision rifle. I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I was an expert rifleman in the Marine Corps. I was an infantryman, no less. They say every Marine is a rifleman, and I'd probably agree with that, but infantry especially so. I was an assaultman, an MOS that no longer exists. Perhaps assaultman was not politically correct enough, so they got rid of it. I don't know why they got rid of it, but I was an assaultman, specialized infantry, did combat tours in the Middle East in the global war on terror. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. My primary, again, infantry. So, maybe not every soldier is a rifleman, but I would say 11 Bravos are. Also with that, I've done quite a bit of competition shooting, as you might know from the regular bio. Mostly handgun, because I joined LAPD, and I wanted to get back into competition shooting, and I reckoned that if I got into some kind of armed human-on-human conflict, likely it was my handgun that was going to save me. So I thought handgun was the most practical thing to shoot competitions with. That was mostly, and has been mostly, what I've competed with since, when did I join LAPD? 06? But I still have competed in rifle. Like the last major rifle competition, I was a West Coast Regional Rifle Champion for American Marksman, and I think that was 2018. For all of the West Coast from Hawaii up to Alaska and then over to Montana, I was the rifle champion for that. And I've also, since then, been a professional big game hunter and guide, as well as hunting for leisure. I've slain all manner of beast, hunted and guided for all manner of beast, as you might imagine. Exotic game, domestic game. Been blessed to hunt all over this beautiful country. Just had a successful spot and stalk hunt recently, which you might imagine gives some credibility with a rifle. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. That's Psalm 144 and Psalm 18. It is God who arms me with strength and makes my way perfect. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer and sets me on high places. He teaches my hands to make war, so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze. Now, archery, which I also enjoy hunting and hunting with archery equipment. But archery was pretty much the individual long-range weapon of the day. Today, that is the rifle. That's what we're going to talk about today, the rifle. And again, I think we as Americans pride ourselves on being a nation of practical riflemen. Not that there's not good riflemen in other places. They've taken a lot of the shooting sports out of the Olympics, but there's still a few, right? The biathlon, those guys are awesome. So, I mean, there are no doubt really good riflemen in I was about to say Soviet Union, but in Russia. There are some Ukrainians probably learning the hard way that riflemanship is crucial to an independent nation, I would argue, even today. And heck, like it or not, and I'm not saying I like it, we are almost unarguably the most powerful military nation on earth, and we still got our butts spanked by the Taliban. Now, they use other stuff. They use IEDs and all manner of terror, but they very much are an army of riflemen, and they kicked us out of their country. We left, right? You can say whatever you want. You can say that it wasn't due to our lack of marksmanship, and I would agree with that, but the fact is that they are and have been for decades, at least going back to the Russian invasion of Afghanistan, talented riflemen. And if not talented, then at least determined. Riflemen, being a rifleman, I think is still relevant in 2023. And I think being a practical rifleman, and that's what's got me on this tangent today, so forgive me if I'm a little bit passionate. As a man who, by God's grace, has made his way in this world with a Bible and a firearm in practical manners. I forgot to mention I was also a private contractor. Private contractor, very much using a rifle as a private contractor, but very much made my way in this world, being skilled with weapons by God's grace. And maybe this is just me. Maybe I'm looking at it through the wrong lens. There are a lot of people buying guns today, and that's fantastic. There are a lot of people buying rifles today. There are probably more Americans that own AR-15 derivatives, for an example, than ever before. There are all kinds of cool widgets and gadgets and look-at-me devices to clamp onto said weapons and other weapons. But that, I think, is the trap that has caused us to slide off the road that is being a practical rifleman. Just like many other areas in our modern Western culture, I think many men, and I do a whole other podcast called Alpha Male Podcast that maybe this overarching theme should go into, but many Western men fall into the trap of wanting to buy our way out of a situation, wanting to buy our way out, taking the easy, lazy road out of a situation, wanting to buy our way into practical riflemanship. And I don't think that's possible even in 2023. I don't think it'll be possible in 2023 if our Lord and Savior has not returned by then. You can't buy skill. Much like going to the gym. I don't care how much money you have. When I see a fit dude, when I see a man that takes his physical fitness seriously, I respect that. It doesn't matter if he's rich or poor. He cannot buy fitness, right? You cannot buy fitness. Yeah, sure, you can. I'm not saying there aren't advantages if you're wealthy. You could get a personal trainer. I guess you could get steroids, but I mean, it's pretty obvious in general. I think it's obvious anyway. When you look at somebody, you can tell that they take steroids, which is kind of cheating. But as far as practical fitness goes, when you look at a fit man, you can tell that he put the work in, right? Nobody else, you can't pay somebody else to lift weights for you. I mean, you can, but it's not going to do your muscles any good. If you want to be fit, then you have to do the work. Same with being a rifleman. If you want to be a good rifleman, you have to do the work. I don't care how much cool stuff you buy on Amazon to clamp to your rifle. I don't care how nice your rifle is. That doesn't mean that you're effective with it. Much like a guitar. And that is something I'm not familiar with, right? But I understand this principle. Maybe we still have Jimi Hendrix guitar, right? Maybe Jimi Hendrix guitar is in a museum somewhere. Maybe it's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. If you gave me Jimi Hendrix guitar, gave me all the advantages, and said, tomorrow we're going to pay millions of people to show up at this arena and listen to you play the guitar. And that's Jimi Hendrix guitar. It's a great guitar. I don't know what he played, Les Paul, Fender Stratocaster. I don't know. Doesn't matter. The point is, it doesn't matter because I don't care how nice the guitar you give me or how nice the amps are or how good the sound crew is. I'm not going to be able to play that guitar well because I can't play the guitar. Doesn't matter about the guitar. The guitar is part of the equation. Now, if I want to be a rock star, I must have the tools, right? I must have either a good voice or passion, the ability to play an instrument, right? But I'm not going to buy my way into it. I'm not going to buy my way into being a great guitar player. Even if I were to afford lessons, I would still have to do the work to be able to play the guitar. You get the analogy. You give me Jimi Hendrix guitar, that doesn't make me Jimi Hendrix. I give the purple-haired barista with a nose ring at Starbucks a Daniel Defense Mark 18, that doesn't make him a Navy SEAL. And doesn't make you a Navy SEAL either. If you want to be a practical rifleman, you have to put in the work. But I think, again, going down that, perhaps we've gone down the wrong road. I think because people can, and some of these things are force multipliers. I will definitely admit an optic on a rifle is a force multiplier. It certainly can be. But it multiplies the force. It multiplies the skill. If your skill is 0, you multiply anything by 0, and it's still 0. That's how math works. And I think we've fallen into this trap that, oh, I've got a nice AR-15 and I'm going to put a really nice optic on it, and I'm ready. You're not ready for anything except to get shot and hand that weapon over to the enemy if you don't have skill to use it. If you don't have, one, the willingness, the common sense, which is a big undiscussed thing in the gun world, I think. You don't have the skill, the common sense, the determination, the grit, the courage, and the skill to wield that weapon. It's a weapon in name only. You can't buy your way into proficiency. I'm sorry if that busts your bubble. If you have a really good AR-15 sitting there, and you're thinking, what I really need is another different kind of optic on it. Is that really what you need, or is what you need to get out and practice and shoot that weapon? I don't care if you just have iron sights on it. I qualified expert in the Marine Corps with iron sights, shooting targets at 500 meters with iron sights and a sling. No fancy bipod, no 18 power scope. Likewise, when I've done competition shooting, I shot bullseyes the size of a printed period, or like the size of the ball in a ballpoint pen. I would slice out those bullseyes with iron sights. I never did this discipline, but there are men that go out and shoot 1,000-yard competitions with iron sights. I'm not a Luddite. I'm not against I'm not against optics, but what I'm saying is they can do it because they have the skill. If you don't have the skill and I give you the optic, you still can't do it. Sorry to bust your bubble. Don't go down this wrong road. It is good to have money and resources, and we should use those. Let he who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one. And a sword is a weapon, but it is an extension of use of force. You must be able to wield said sword. David, a man after God's own heart, for it is written, the Lord is a man of war. David was a man of war. The Lord is a man of war is Exodus 15. Now, that's not all that God is. God is multifaceted. He has many things. He is rich in mercy. But it is written, the Lord is a man of war, Exodus 15, very plainly. David, also multifaceted. He was a musician. He was a poet, a beautiful poet, a king. He was also a man of war. He was skilled with his weapon. Even before he was in the proper military, right? He went to see what the military was doing in the lead up to Goliath. But he was skilled with his weapon. He said before he ever slew Goliath that he had slain bear and lion. And that takes skill, right? The battle is the Lord's. You need God on your side, and you should be fighting with God at the right time for the right reason. But he was skilled with his weapon. There can be no doubt, right? Can you read that? And read the passage. If you are a man of war, if you are a man that, is familiar with interpersonal deadly conflict, let's say, to put it nicely, he walks and looks for the smooth stones, for the right ammunition for his gun. Does that not call to you as a warrior, as a man that spends time and dedication to being familiar with his weapon, as a man in times past that was trained and dedicated and familiar with his weapon? And just being proficient with weapons in general. Because you never know, right? When he fled, he was fleeing. He went to the priest and he had no sword. He had to flee because even though he had been anointed king, there was still a king on the throne that was trying to kill him. You're probably familiar with the story. King Saul was trying to kill him. He fled with no weapon and was given a weapon by the priest, the sword of Goliath, which he slew. You should be familiar with all manner of weapons. The weapon, there's a t-shirt. I was a Marine. There was a t-shirt for a long time in the Marines. Maybe it's still around, where it said, one mind, any weapon. And it had probably a picture with like a K-bar, which Marines are very familiar with. A K-bar, a fighting knife. Who knows what other weapons it had on there. An M16, maybe a machine gun, right? But it doesn't matter. As a Marine, you're a warrior, and you should be good with weapons. Yours or others that you pick up, whatever it is. You should... They're called the fundamentals for a reason, right? Stance, grip, sight alignment, sight picture, trigger control, breath control, follow through. These things are transcendent of many different weapons platforms. Now, there's a big difference between handguns and rifles, but many of those, like trigger control, is crucial. If you have great trigger control, likely you can shoot many weapons well. Maybe not as well as your own weapon that you're very familiar with. Maybe not as well as your rifle that you're familiar with. But if you're a master of the fundamentals, if you are an expert at trigger control, then likely you can shoot any weapon well. I don't like Glocks. I know you guys, there's probably no shock to the people that have listened to this for a long time. But I've carried a Glock professionally. Right when I was a private contractor, we carried Glocks. I carried a Glock as a police officer. I don't shoot a Glock as well as I can shoot many other handguns. But you know what? I can still shoot a Glock very well. In fact, a lot of times when I'll go to training, especially if I'm the commander, I was the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters, most of my guys carried Glocks. So I would train with a Glock when we'd go to like training classes because I wanted them to see that I was a good shooter, not because of the weapon. I was a good shooter in spite of the weapon. Because if you can shoot good with a Glock, you can probably shoot better with many other handguns. That kind of illustrates that. If you are skilled, that skill will transcend many weapons platforms. And again, getting back to the main theme here, I think we've gone down the wrong road. As a rich heritage of American riflemen, because we've become so opulent, we've become so, dare I even say, spoiled. Certainly there were some very, very wealthy men that were Minutemen in the Continental militias. But I think in general, a man had a rifle or a musket. He had a long arm. Maybe he had a handgun, but he had that was a significant portion of his earthly wealth, unless he was all but the uber wealthy. And many of the founding fathers were uber wealthy, and they gave up a lot of that wealth and security to, anyway, that's probably a different topic, but they valued freedom and liberty and honor and things like that more than money. Anyway, back then, a man likely had a rifle. If it was even a rifle, it may have been a musket. Now, that was one of the things I think that gave us an advantage, is that we had riflemen that were skilled. Hunting, defense, Indian wars. They were skilled with a rifle and or a musket. But they probably had a fighting long gun, a fighting rifle, a practical rifle. And they knew how to use it. Why? Because they used it. They actually used it. It didn't sit pretty in a safe, right? It wasn't their precious, right? It probably hung above a mantle or by the door. Why? Because they might get, to be politically incorrect, savage Indians, and not all Indians are savage, but certainly many of them were. I like reading American history, and I've read several accounts of just savage acts. Indians would take people not of their tribe and take a small tree in the ground and strip it and make it a spike and make somebody sit on it till it went up through their body and not kill them and leave them there to suffer and die, or cut off the bottom of their feet and make them walk around for their entertainment. Sick and disgusting. When people like that are outside your door, you had better be skilled with your weapon. Not to mention when the redcoats came, right? These men were men that were skilled with a weapon. And that tradition has continued on, right? Carlos Hathcock, Sergeant York, men skilled with a rifle. There was a time not so long ago where I think most American men looked up to the rifleman, looked at a man being skilled with a rifle as an honorable, noble, and worthwhile pursuit. I don't know that that's the case anymore, and that saddens me. Because they get off on an even stranger rabbit hole. Public education system, of all the things that they teach, but they don't teach things like how to change a tire, or how to do personal finance, how to balance a checkbook, how to save money, how to be a rifleman. How is gun safety just not part, especially in America? Even if you don't like guns, there's a pretty legit case to be made that every American citizen, because there are so many guns in America, should know how to safely unload and handle a firearm. Right? That doesn't make you safer, the fact that you don't know anything about guns. I think if young Americans were taught the power and respect due these weapons, you'd probably have less incidents with firearms, not more. I mentioned that I grew up a poor boy in the South. Our high school had a rifle team. Many of the high schools around us had a rifle team. The one just south of us, they didn't even have a football team, but they had a rifle team. And we competed with each other. We would walk down the halls with weapons. We had an armory. I'm not that old, guys. I'm not like 65. We'd walk down the halls with weapons. Most of us hunted. I'm not gonna dime anybody out because I was too poor to have a car in high school, but it was not uncommon for many of us to have weapons at school. And the thought of us, and I was a scrapper. I fought a lot. I got into a lot of fist fights. I was not afraid to throw down. But and I was many times armed. But the idea of using a weapon like that on another student was even before I was a Christian, was unconscionable to me, because I had put meat on the table since I was a youth. I had slain beasts since I was a youth. I was familiar with a rifle. I knew what they did. That was not even on the table for me or for any of my friends, because we knew and understood and were familiar with a rifle. I think when American boys stopped actually being familiar with the actual blued steel or stainless steel or whatever, the actual weapon, and got familiar with weapons on video games. And I'm not here to rag on video games, but they got away from the real power of a rifle and into the hypothetical, ethereal, as weapons being toys, as guns being toys, as rifles being toys. That's when we started seeing these massive violent things, active shooters and school shootings and such, right? Going back to the AR-15, the America's modern rifle of the day. Well, it's not that modern. It was designed in the 50s. And, for a long time, you could get fully automatic ones as a civilian. So the power and this, whatever they want to paint as a scary black assault rifle, that's not a new thing. That's not a 1990s and before thing. That way predates that. It goes back to the 50s. There weren't school shootings in the 50s. Even though you had the same guns. Even before that, the M1 Garand from the 1930s, or the Thompson submachine gun from the 20s. Right, the Thompson submachine gun was legal for citizens to own as a machine gun. There weren't school shootings then. The M1 Garand is more powerful, not less powerful, than an AR-15. There weren't school shootings then. It's not the guns that changed. It was something in our psychology. And I have to imagine less young men being familiar and having riflemanship, being riflemen as a pastime. I think less familiarity and less respect for the rifle, for the weapon, for the sword got us in this mess. That's just my thoughts. But if you need to train more, then train more. And if you know some young men that could use some training, it's not on the government. It's on you. It's on you as a man. You have a son or a daughter or a niece or a nephew or a cousin or just a friend that is at all receptive, or their parents that are all receptive of you teaching them gun safety and gun proficiency and being a rifleman. You should take it seriously on yourself. You can't give what you don't have. Right? If you want to teach somebody skill with a rifle, then guess what you ought to have? Skill with a rifle. If you want this tradition to continue to generations to come, then you must possess it yourself to pass it on. There are exceptions to that, right? Like you could have a kid that's totally into guns and stuff whose parents were not into guns. But at some point, somebody had to teach them to be a rifleman, if they are in fact a rifleman. Let us not shuck our responsibility and let video games, although video games have probably gotten many people into firearms. I don't play video games. I don't even have a TV. But at some point, you got to put down the controller and pick up a real gun and be familiar with it and get skilled with it. And that takes training. And the fact that you own a Daniel Defense, or the fact that you own a Colt 6920, or a Scar 17, or an AK-47, or whatever your flavor is, that doesn't make you a rifleman. And I think we've gone down, again, largely the wrong road. As an American, not individually, right? Many of you listening to this probably take your role as an American rifleman seriously. Or, I know we have international listeners, as a Canadian rifleman. Or Italy. Yes, you can own guns in Europe. And you should have a decent firearm. But you can't buy with gadgets proficiency. You have to train. Just like you can't buy your way into being good at a bench press. You have to actually bench press. You can buy a really nice guitar. You can actually even buy a really nice guitar lessons. But if you don't actually take the lessons and actually do the work, you're not going to be good at guitar. You can buy a nice rifle. You can buy the fanciest optic. You can buy the best ammo. You can buy the best magazines. You can buy the best gun lube. If you don't actually get out and train with your weapon, then you're not effective with it. And that's your weapon. Somebody who's a skilled rifleman could likely pick up your weapon and be better with it than you. you should find that a little irritating. You should use that, a little bit of sand in your shorts, to get out there and train, to be proficient. And a lot of times we look back at nostalgia, rose-tinted glasses at our past. Certainly not every American male, even back in the 1700s, was a great rifleman. There are likely many that grew up in New York. New York was a city even then. Likely many young men that grew up that never touched a rifle. Also, we think of our forefathers, we think of like the great mountain men and the great riflemen and the Minutemen. But you got to remember, like, whether you're talking about Jamestown or the Pilgrims that were coming here to establish a Christian nation with firearms. Well, that'll irritate some people probably. But they came from Europe, and a lot of times even then, right, it wasn't generally acceptable for the average male to walk around Europe, a lot of places, with weapons, with rifles. So they had to come here and hack their way in the wilderness and learn how to hunt. Many of them likely did not know how to hunt. There was not, I don't think, an abundance of game running around England or Holland, where the Pilgrims came from or where the Jamestown settlement came from. They probably weren't great hunters. They had to learn that. They had to hack their way in the wilderness, and they paid for it with blood and starvation. Go look at the death rate in Jamestown. We're looking to the lost colony of Roanoke, right? Those lessons were paid for. A lot of the hard work was laid down, and men died. And you've been given this great freedom and a legacy of riflemen. So don't neglect it by thinking that you can buy your way into skill or buy your way into the art of being a rifleman, the skill of being a rifleman. Don't use our opulence, and make no mistake, if you make more than a few dollars a day, you are likely in the wealthiest group of people in the world. Don't let the fact that we have been blessed with so much wealth lull you into lethargy. Right? Don't let the fact that it's so easy to have a Bible here. Do you know how many of our forefathers, of our Christian forefathers, would have loved to have a written copy of the Word, or to have many different translations? And many Americans, even many Americans, I think, sadly, that would call themselves Christians, don't even open and read their Bible. Right? The fact that you have a Bible is not going to keep the devil at bay. It's not a talisman. You have to read it. You have to know it. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. You don't know the Bible by owning a Bible. First, you need to own a Bible. Then you have to actually do the work and read and train and study and look up and reference. The fact that you own a rifle does not make you a rifleman. The fact that you have a sword does not make you a warrior. You have to train. You have to have discipline. You have to be regimented. You have to be well regulated. That's on you. The fact that you own a rifle, the fact that you own 20 rifles, right? That makes you opulent. That makes you decadent. That makes you privileged. That does not make you a warrior. I see this echoed in the different rifles. I just did one on why so many ARs are bad. Why so many rifles today are bad. And I think this ties into that, because they're so big and so heavy. They're not even meant to be shot in a standing position or in a kneeling position or in any practical shooting position. I've been hunting my entire life, ever since I was a boy. Not my entire life. I guess I didn't pop out of the womb with a rifle. But ever since I was young, probably if you knew how young somebody would call CPS. Walking around the backwoods of the South, putting meat on the table for the family. You know how much meat I've put on the table shooting off a bench? Zero. Why are so many rifles today meant to be shot off a bench or off a tripod, or so big and unwieldy that because people will go to a range and shoot a nice little group off a bench? And there's nothing wrong with shooting a nice little group off a bench. That's like section A, subsection A of being a good rifleman. Getting your gun zeroed. Having an accurate weapon. That's where it starts. That's not the start and the finish. There's so many rifles today are so big and unwieldy and ungainly because most people, if they do anything, they do the first step. Like they get the sword and they sharpen the sword. They got a good sharp sword. Fantastic. Again, that doesn't make you a warrior. You have a crazy accurate rifle off a bench. Okay. Can you shoot it in a practical environment, in a practical way? Can you get hits? Can you shoot a decent group, not off a bench? Right? When Hamas, radical Islamic terrorists, wanting to kill and destroy Christians and Jews, paraglided down and took women and did unspeakable things to them and killed civilians. Did the IDF come out and set up shooting benches and tripods and get their 20-pound rifles and set them on rests and shoot at stationary targets? No, right? They were practical riflemen. They shot standing, kneeling, urban prone, at moving targets, likely many times while they were moving. I know and served with some Israeli IDF guys, and my hat's off to them, and my heart goes out to them. But don't make the mistake of thinking stuff like that can't happen here. If you do ever have to fight, it's almost certainly not going to be off a bench. Have a practical rifle and be a practical rifleman. Be a warrior. Be a useful rifleman. I didn't go through it in this bio, but I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. Also an FBI certified instructor. I don't know how many real warriors I've trained. And I've been blessed by God to know a thing or two about practical shooting. And it's not off a bench or off a tripod, or I've never seen anybody impressed in combat about how tiny a group someone shot. Again, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's the beginning. That's like section A, subsection A of the manual. That's not the ending. And I think because we've gotten so spoiled with such good and accurate rifles, and that's an amazing thing, that we think that somehow makes us accurate. It doesn't. Because you're probably not going to shoot in an actual situation off a bench or even off a bipod. Maybe. But much, much more likely, you're going to have to do it when you're out of breath, winded, on the run, moving dynamically, getting shot at quickly. If you're talking about that, or if you're talking about hunting. Unless you're talking about shooting an animal from a feeder, which you do. That's not how I hunt generally. Ever since I was a boy, I loathed sitting in a stand. I like spot and stalk hunting. And for that kind of hunting, being a practical rifleman. Don't let it be a lost art. Don't let it be a dying art. Don't think that you have a rifle that you shot a small group off a bench, that you're now somehow a rifleman or a warrior. Get out and train. And if you're well trained, well regulated, pass it on. Say it's your individual right and duty, and it's your duty to pass it on, to help others. Blessings are meant to be shared. Now, I'm trying to put my effort where my mouth is here. I do this podcast not to bless me, but to bless you guys, the audience. If this has ignited a fire in you or reignited a fire in you as to being a skilled rifleman, I am and have been trying to come up with a modern, practical, DIY course for rifle training / a qualification. A gauge as to where you're at. I've been trying to come up with one in a way that requires little infrastructure that most American riflemen should be able to do. It's not a gimme, like not easy, but I mean, as far as I don't want it to be cost prohibitive. I want it to be done with most common rifles or common modern rifles. And I'm still trying to come up with one. It is a bit of a challenge. You might be familiar with the DIY Armed Citizen Course of Fire for handgun. Anyway, for now, if you're not familiar with, I would encourage you to shoot the U.S. Army alternate paper qual for a rifle. It's not the best, but it's good. And you might think, you're a Marine, why not the Marine Corps one? Well, the Marine Corps would need a 500-yard range, which again, for a lot of people, especially east of the Mississippi, is not feasible. You also need somebody getting shot at. Yes, as Marines, even for regular rifle qualifications, we would shoot at each other. You have another Marine down in the pit, as they call it, holding the target up, or lowering and raising the target on a stand, literally getting shot at, shots flying over his head. I'm not recommending that on this podcast. Their Marines have a reputation, and I think for good reason. But I think the Army alternate rifle qualification, it's to be shot on a reduced size target, which is easy to obtain. Probably find it on many places you can order online. And you can shoot it on a 25-meter range. It's supposed to approximate shooting similar size targets out to 300. They're not all at 300. But if you look that up, you can easily look up the U.S. Army alternate paper qual and the target. I would say start there. Because if you can't pass that one, I don't know that you're going to pass the one that I'm... Well, anyway, start there. Start with the U.S. Army alternate rifle qualification course. It's a decent place to start. Just a quick reminder, as alluded to in the beginning, in the preamble, I did record that Patreon-only episode, What is a Modern Rifleman's Rifle? For the patrons already. Even if I do a different version for the general audience, the patrons get a lot of special insider-only content, and they get a lot of content early and commercial-free. If this strikes a chord with you, especially if you've been thinking about becoming a patron, but tapping into that heritage and that ability and that skill, the talent you've been given and growing it to be a practical rifleman, to have the skill and to be able to call yourself a rifleman. If that calling, that heritage, those talents call to you, this is a good time to become a patron. That episode's already recorded. Also, like many things I put out early for the patrons, this qual will be posted on Patreon first. It has already been done. I spent yesterday out freezing in 23 to 33 degree temperatures. At least that's what the thermometer said. Cold, frozen ground, out running and tweaking the qualification course, a modern practical rifleman's qual. So again, consider becoming a patron. Put a lot of work and effort into a modern practical rifleman training course of fire. You can get out there and train yourself and sharpen and use the talents you've been given. So I hope to see you on Patreon. Hey Gunfighters, just a quick insert. There's some new merch at the store, goodshepherdtraining.com. The sports hoodie that's in the thumbnail, if you're looking on Spotify, that's available. If you're on Apple, I apologize for that really old thumbnail that I took in my old office. I've tried to reach out to Apple, tried to get them to change it, but alas, it's still there. Spotify lets you change different images for each episode. But if you're listening on Apple, which is another big one, there is a pretty cool OD green shaded hoodie that says on the back, Roots, and it has crossed rifles. An M16 and an M14. And on the front it has an old front stuffer, an old musket, and it says, a rifleman like my fathers before me. Anyway, if that intrigues you, there's a link in the show notes if you care to look at that more deeply. So, yes. Have a sword. Have a rifle. But train with it. Be proficient with it. Have some aptitude. And hopefully help others do the same. Anyway, with that, I'll start wrapping up this episode. I know that many times the gear, the cool widget episodes do the best, like top 5 polymer striker fire pistols of whatever. top 5 micro 9mm. Probably would get more views than this episode. But you know what? I'm doing this episode because I think it's important. You know what else is important? We're going to move into the tactical tip of the day and the tactical verse of the day. Likely, if you're doing practical rifle stuff, you're out in adverse conditions. You should have some basic survival gear. It's good to distribute that gear. I've been big on the idea of redundancy for a while, but I heard it put by somebody that very much not a gun podcast, but Modern Outdoor Survival, a British guy. He does a lot of like search and rescue and stuff, and I really like his podcast. It's real practical. I guess I had been doing this, but never thought of it. He articulated it in this way, so I wanted to give credit where credit is due, Modern Outdoor Survival. But he talks about your crucial gear and distributing that stuff on you. Like if you have ways to make a fire, good, but don't have them all in one place. Don't have them like in a fire kit in your pack. Cool if you want a fire kit in your pack, but also have a way to make fire in your jacket and in your pants, in a pants pocket, in a jacket pocket, and in your pack. So that if you get into some sticky situation, you have to cut your pack loose and it goes careening down a mountain, you still have a way to make fire. If it gets hot out and you jettison your jacket and you're stalking an animal and you forget where you put it and you can't find it, and all your ways to make a fire were in your jacket, or all your compasses, you had one compass and it was in your jacket, right? That's a bad day. If you had a compass on your jacket pocket or in your jacket, and you have one in your back pocket or on your belt, right? You get the idea. Distribute that crucial gear. That's a tactical tip for the day. Your tactical verse of the day. There are many I could go and talk about weapons, but I'm going to quote. Actually, I'm just going to go through Psalm 23. Likely, many people know part of that psalm, but I think the entire psalm is beautiful. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.